So, good morning, good evening, good day, wherever you might be in the world. Welcome to ASRG. We have a great webinar for you tonight or today. Um, we have Kamel here. He's going to talk to us a little bit about Bluetooth and how to hack. And actually, I think he's going to do some demonstrations as well. So, pretty excited about this. Um, we're having a little bit of technical difficulties today, so please bear with me. This is the first time that we are streaming live from Germany to Singapore, to Japan, to Australia. The US, I believe it's still a little early today, but anyways, we're gonna see how this works. Um, Good. So, um, I hope you guys can hear me. It says that it's getting some issues, but we will try it out. Um, Very good. Anyways, so very shortly, I want to just take a minute to go over what ASRG is. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is John Heldreth. I'm the founder of Automotive Security Research Group. For Automotive Security Research Group, we are focused on many different things, but basically we're trying to make sure that the automotive security industry has the type of competencies, the type of communication, networking, and to make sure that we collaborate on some different projects. As I said, I'm the founder. It's something that we've been working on since 2017. In my day job, I'm working also as the product security lead at Porsche Engineering. So I been in the last 15 years also in the automotive industry. I have to admit, I'm not the security expert, but I'm still trying to learn. So um, ASRG is focused on these three areas. One is knowledge, and basically for knowledge, we want to focus on the ability for these two fields, the IT security field and the automotive security field, to come together. Basically, the IT security field has a really good knowledge, processes set up, governance in place for security related topics. However, the automotive industry doesn't have these IT related security competencies, but the automotive industry has a very specific way of product development. And as these two industries are merging together because of all of these new functions that are coming into the vehicles, we need to make sure that the people that are working on the solutions have the right information they need to ensure correct development. So part of the topic here is to make sure the people in these positions, the guys working on solutions, the management that's leading it, the HR that's searching for these people to fill the open positions at companies, that they have the right knowledge to make the right recommendations, to make the right decisions, and to get the right people in place so that our products that are on the road are not only safe, but also secure. The second point here is we have networking. So if you can't find the information, if you don't know where to look, or maybe it's something you can't find in a book or on an internet site, it's always good to have people behind you that you can ask. And this is what ASRG kind of fulfills, is it gives you an opportunity to network with other people in the same field that have maybe the same issues or different experiences, that maybe where you can answer a question or ask a question and get some response, get some different experience, make sure that we don't make the same mistakes twice. So we have networking. We have for networking, we have Slack channel and a Telegram channel. We also usually do face-to-face meetings, but right now with the situation regarding Corona, unfortunately, we stay at home. The last point is collaboration. There's a lot of things that shouldn't be done in every company. They should be done a little bit outside. And this type of information or projects is something that we can collaborate on. For example, this could be a list of all of the different standards and norms that are related to automotive cybersecurity. Or it could be potentially an intelligence platform that we are currently working on to make sure that companies have information about what's going on in the field where their products are operating. So for vehicles or charge parks or smart cities, all of these things need to come together, and we're all affected by different vulnerabilities or different attacks in the field. And it's really important that we have this information, that it needs to be relevant. It also needs to be timely for us. And this is something that we're working as a project in ASRG that should be available to everyone. So these three topics is where we're focused on: knowledge, networking, and collaboration. We have a lot of locations. So we have around 4,000 members. Actually, I think it's 4,300 something. And unfortunately here, this number is even wrong. It's 26 different locations around the world. Our newest locations are in Canada, so we have Toronto and Windsor. But we also have 4 locations in North America, or in US. We have one location in Brazil. We also have a new location in Mexico. And then we have many different European locations, including Germany, UK, and Romania, as well as Tel Aviv, and so on. So we're looking forward. It's really exciting to see this type of growth, to understand that we are bringing value to the members. So I'm really happy to see this. If you guys don't have a location near you and you want to start something, please get in touch with me. Just send me an email at info or hello@asrg.io, and we'll just get in touch and talk about what makes sense for you or for your location. Very good. We have so many cool webinars coming up. Today we have Taking the Wheel with Automotive Bluetooth with Kamel. Next, actually tomorrow, we have CAN bus attacks and mitigations with Ken Tendell. We're going to talk about securing CAN bus. And he's recently put out a white paper that kind of brings together these different aspects of this unsecure bus structure and how we can go about authenticating whether or not messages are coming from the right sources. And then next week we have relay attacks applied to NFC virtual car keys, a really cool discussion about using virtual keys. Enrico is going to give us that talk. And then we have CAN bus reverse engineering with Raspberry Pi. So this is going to be a practical example. David Evans is going to go through with us how, if you want to get started, how to get going with CAN, how to get going with a Raspberry Pi. Really nice talk as well. Very good. So without further ado, I am going to jump over to the man of the hour. We have Kamel here, and Kamel is going to give us a talk about taking the wheel with automotive Bluetooth. Kamel, welcome to ASRG World. Thank you for being here. I'm totally excited about the talk, so.
Hi, John. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. Is my screen currently visible? Should I start rolling through the slides, or just making sure we're all set to go?
Yep.
Wonderful. Okay. So today we're going to be talking about automotive Bluetooth. So a quick introduction for myself. My name is Kamel Ghali. I'm an automotive cybersecurity architect at White Motion. White Motion is a lesser known automotive cybersecurity industry player. We've been around since about 2017, but we were formerly acquired by Calsonic Kansei, a Japanese automotive tier 1 supplier that then merged with the Italian Magneti Marelli into the conglomerate company currently known as Marelli. I'm based in Tokyo, Japan, technically, although my workplace is about 20 minutes away from Tokyo. And I've been in the automotive cybersecurity for, I want to say it's been over 3 years now. I started with a different startup company back in 2017, and I've seen lots of different sides of the industry, from the automotive cybersecurity vendor side to the independent consultant side to the penetration tester side. I've done a lot of community work with both ASRG and with the Car Hacking Village. I was on the administrative board of the Detroit branch of the Automotive Security Research Group until I moved here to Japan in February of 2020. Upon getting here, I actually started the Japanese branch, the Tokyo slash JPN branch of ASRG. Unfortunately, our founding coincided with the global COVID-19 pandemic, and so we haven't had any in-person meetings yet, but I'm hoping that as things start to get better, we'll be able to have some of those in the near future. But for now, I'm happy to be able to present to you all through the internet. Some of my recent areas of interests include Bluetooth, USB, digital forensics, and not listed here include RFID, so on and so forth. And a couple of my hobbies include fighting games, cooking, playing the ukulele, and getting lost in new places. So without further ado, enough about me and on to the interesting stuff. So Bluetooth. What is Bluetooth? I'm sure it sounds familiar to many of you because it's a general purpose technology. It's not an automotive specific technology. Bluetooth is a very common cable replacement technology found in virtually all smartphones, computers, and many wireless Internet of Things accessory devices worldwide. It operates in the 2.4 gigahertz frequency range, which is the same frequency range that some of the Wi-Fi standards use, some of the 802.11 standards. And as a result, a lot of Wi-Fi chips are actually bundled together with Bluetooth capability. The vendors making Bluetooth chips, be they Qualcomm or Broadcom, so on and so forth, they usually make one chip with two different functionality sets, right? One for Wi-Fi, one for Bluetooth, but they're included on the same silicon for just ease of portability. It utilizes frequency hopping through that frequency range. So a little bit something that differentiates Bluetooth from Wi-Fi from the physical perspective is that while Wi-Fi channels will be one dedicated slice of that 2.4 gigahertz spectrum, with Bluetooth, depending on if it's Bluetooth Classic or Bluetooth Low Energy, it has a large number of channels that the devices will actually hop between at different intervals. So the communication is never along the same channel. It's always kind of juggled back and forth between different channels with the best connectivity. This gives the benefit of reducing the amount of congestion that there might be on one frequency channel, but it also adds a bit of security because it's not as easy to track a Bluetooth communication over the air as it would be with Wi-Fi. I'll mention that some more about that later on in the presentation when we talk about Bluetooth security and security research on Bluetooth. But one of Bluetooth's very well-known features is that it has this frequency hopping capability. So its advertised ranges can be quite long if you're using a special antenna, but in practice, most applications are shorter range, so within the 30 meters of the user. So going onward, oh, sorry, went a little bit too far. This is a little diagram I've made showing the different protocols that kind of comprise Bluetooth as a technology. So Bluetooth isn't really one specific technology stack or one specific application that's used on all these different devices. It's kind of a set of specifications that's maintained by a group called the Bluetooth Special Interest Group. So the Bluetooth Special Interest Group publishes the spec, and it's up to each manufacturer of a device to implement it in their own unique way, right? And the important parts are all pretty pretty ubiquitous. You have the same layers in all your Bluetooth devices, but how they're done, the firmware of the chips itself is not mandated. And this is something else I'll mention later when we talk about the security aspects of Bluetooth, but it's what makes Bluetooth security a little bit hard to research. So looking at this diagram here, you can see you have the RFCOM, SDP, and L2 cap layers on top. You have the host controller interface in the middle, and then all of the boxes in red are what are called controller interfaces. So the white ones are host interfaces or host protocols, and the red ones are controller protocols. This is an important distinction because when we're using Bluetooth in our everyday lives, we don't usually have access to everything going on in the controller side of things. So the data being processed by these different protocols, it's very hard to get a look into what's going on underneath the hatch, right? We have access to what's handled by the operating system. That's the top three layers, the RFCOM, SDP, and L2 cap layers, right? We have tools that let us use those for our own applications. And then we have the host controller interface, which gives us a small look at what goes on under the hood of that Bluetooth chip. There's some messages that need to be sent between the host operating system and the Bluetooth chip and the firmware running in there, and those are called HCI messages. And we have the ability to monitor those as well. Unfortunately, any lower than that is really when we lose a lot of visibility on Bluetooth communications. So going on, we're going to talk a little bit about security in Bluetooth. So when Bluetooth first came out in the early, I want to say in the early 2000s, there were a lot of gimmicks that could be exploited because the protocol hadn't really matured very well. It was still new. All the implementations were still kind of finding their way. There were little bugs like you could assail someone with a business card by sending something to their Bluetooth device unwarranted, right? There was no security on the connections. And so a lot of these gimmicks ended up getting patched out with one of the more major updates in Bluetooth's history, which was the Bluetooth 2.1 specification update. And then after that update, when all those little gimmicks were patched, there was a good amount of time where there wasn't any big Bluetooth research, I would say. I'm sure it was going on behind the scenes, but it wasn't a huge area of focus. And one of the reasons behind, a couple of the reasons for that is, as I mentioned before, the processes running on the chip, right, on the firmware of the Bluetooth chip, they aren't as easy to analyze as those running on top. So you don't have a lot of visibility into the how the data is being managed down there, how the code is running down there, right? So the amount of research you can do without a lot of sophisticated technical know-how and equipment is pretty limited. Bundling in the fact that you can't analyze Bluetooth waves as they fly through the air thanks to the frequency hopping, it makes that avenue of security research more difficult as well. I'm sure some of you, if you've played with things like Wi-Fi cracking before, you know that you can buy on Amazon for like $25, $35, you can buy a special Wi-Fi card with monitor mode, right? So in monitor mode, you can just monitor a Wi-Fi channel and you can see all the packets that go through this channel, right? Unfortunately, there's no such cheap hardware that does the equivalent of that for Bluetooth, right? If you wanted a device that could monitor all the Bluetooth channels and recreate an entire, packet capture session between two devices, you're looking at a $40,000 piece of equipment. And these things do exist; they are for sale, but that kind of equipment investment is not something that most, lower end research institutes or universities can really procure, right? It's a very expensive, high grade piece of equipment, and then of course not to mention, as I mentioned before, the complexity of the Bluetooth specification. It's very thick. It's this non-technical spec is available for everyone to read, and of course the guidelines are made publicly available, but it is quite complex, and so it's been kind of a black sheep within the security research industry. So moving on, I want to talk about some recent automotive Bluetooth security research. So what I'm showing here is a diagram that was published by Tencent Keen Security Lab related to some research they publicized recently. It was actually a couple of months ago here in 2020, where they publicized some of the research they had done on some Lexus/Toyota vehicles. So they published this research on Lexus Toyota vehicles manufactured outside of Japan, starting from 2017, that contained a certain infotainment system within them. Right. The Bluetooth chips on these vehicles were using a they were essentially unpatched relative to this Blueborn set of vulnerabilities, right? Blueborn is a set of vulnerabilities that was released by Armis Labs in, I want to say, 2017. So it's been a couple of years now, and these vulnerabilities were quite high profile at the time. They essentially allowed remote code execution on thousands of different classifications of Bluetooth devices. And since then, thankfully, most Bluetooth devices being used today are actually, up to date, and they have these issues patched out. But at the time of this research being done, those Toyota vehicles did not have these vulnerabilities patched out. So what happened was Bluetooth essentially acted as a gateway to the rest of the vehicle's communication systems, right? What do we think about when we think of Bluetooth in the car? You think of connecting your phone to your car in order to do things like upload your phone book, play music through your phone, hands-free calling. Those are the main applications that Bluetooth has in automotive, right? You don't control your car through Bluetooth on your phone like it's a game controller, right? You just don't do that. But the information that is there is usually related to multimedia systems and phone books. You don't associate that with execution. But the issue is that with these vulnerabilities, you can actually gain a foothold in the stack, in the Bluetooth stack, and execute arbitrary code. This is a big deal because in most situations, Bluetooth needs to be run at a very high privilege level, right? In the situation we're taking a look at here, they had daemon level privileges once they exploited these vulnerabilities, which gave them a lot of control over the head unit's computing systems. This is kind of a logical layout of what that head unit looks like. There's a main board and there's a UCOM board, right? These are the two main boards that are found inside this head unit. By using the Bluetooth vulnerabilities they exploited, they were able to install a backdoor that would connect to their computers over Wi-Fi, over 802.11 network, which would then give them a shell on the vehicle. From there, they were actually able to reflash the UCOM board from the main board because one of the main board's functionalities is that it's used to process updates to the other parts of the vehicle. Right. This UCOM board is actually connected to some of the CAN buses inside the vehicle. Normally, there are filters in place to prevent arbitrary message sending, but because they had power to control the board that was in charge of updating the software, the security researchers were able to patch out those filters on the CAN bus, and thus they were able to achieve arbitrary CAN message sending on the bus. From there, there's quite a bit you can do, right? You can DOS the bus, you can do message replays, you can log data, so on and so forth. You have a lot of flexibility with what to do from there. Luckily, because of the way the CAN buses were segregated, they didn't have direct access to the actual main body ECUs, the control ECUs of the vehicle. The CAN buses they did have access to were the dedicated CAN, as you can see here, for the head unit itself, as well as the infotainment CAN, which is connected to the gateway. There was no direct communication to things like the brakes or the steering or the gas, which is, of course, that's a huge relief. But it's not to say that this wasn't a big deal when this came out. When this vulnerability research was actually revealed earlier in 2020, this was a big deal among the Japanese automakers because Toyota is kind of seen as the big brother of Japanese automakers. It's like the biggest one, and it's the one everyone looks to for the trends in the industry. And this was a very worrying, right? That, oh, what if our cars are vulnerable to this issue as well? So Tencent did the responsible thing and declined to reveal, the full technical, details of how their research did. But we're hoping that a technical report will be available sometime in 2021, according to what they have on their website. I encourage anyone interested to read more. It's a simple Google search away. But this was a great reminder that even while Bluetooth itself is not directly controlling these parts of the vehicle, it's still a key entry point that allows a security researcher or hacker access to the more critical parts of the vehicle. So moving on, starting now, I'm actually going to switch over to a terminal screen, and we're going to be doing a bit of Bluetooth probing of a system I actually have in front of me. So I'm going to be doing the cursed live demo. And as any of you that have done this kind of presentation before, live demos are always known to go wrong. And so I want to apologize in advance if something does happen. But I'm actually going to be showing you how some of the Bluetooth tools available in Linux work. I'm going to be running through a couple of the steps that I take when I'm analyzing something. The device we're going to be testing today is an Eclipse brand navigation unit manufactured by Denso in Japan. This is something that we've bought for the purpose of doing security research and these kind of demonstrations. So this is not something we received from a customer. This is available on the market for anyone to purchase. And I'd like to make it clear that we're doing these tests not to show any vulnerabilities that can be exploited with the system and lead to its compromise. The techniques I'll be showing are to help us understand what security risks might be present in the vehicles we drive, and it's important that we all know how to analyze them, how to assess them, and how to protect ourselves and our families that all ride in these vehicles. And that's really the essence of the automotive cybersecurity industry, right? I'm not trying to teach you how to hack your neighbor's car so you can get his phone number and his phone book, right? That's not the point. We're not trying to be black hat hackers here. We're trying to share what we know to better the industry as a whole. So I'm going to actually take a break from presenting my screen so I can switch over to my terminal. If you will excuse me for 1 second, I will be back in just a sec. Okay, let's see. Let's minimize this. Let's maximize this. Set present now and select the right screen. Sorry, unfortunately, it wouldn't let me share my entire monitor as some other, I think Zoom lets you do that. Maybe Google Meets does too, but John, do you mind if I just ask for a confirmation? Does everything look okay? Is my terminal visible?
Yeah, it looks good, Camille.
All right, sounds good. Let me get started. So as you can see here, I have a terminal window open. I'm using a standard Kali Linux distribution on my computer. I don't have any fancy hardware that I'm using for any of these tests. These are all things you could probably do on your own. If you wanted to recreate some of the steps or some of the tools, that I'm going to be using today, I wouldn't recommend using a virtual machine just because things get kind of strange when you use a virtual machine because the host OS is also using the same Bluetooth chip. And so when you pair with something, it can get kind of confusing. So if you have a bare metal Linux system to run these, I definitely recommend using it. But it's not the end of the world. It'll just be a little bit more complicated. As many of you might know, when you're using Linux, nothing really goes the same way for everyone, right? This is just kind of something you begin to understand as you use these systems. So anyway, without further ado, I'm going to be walking through the process of starting this kind of Bluetooth evaluation of an automotive system. So the first thing you have to do is make sure that your Bluetooth service is running. So it seems kind of counterintuitive, but a lot of times your distribution will actually have the Bluetooth service disabled upon boot up. This is just the way some of them are. You always want to make sure that it's running. So we're going to go ahead and say sudo, right, super user do, service Bluetooth start, right? It's going to prompt me for my authentication, and now we're started. So now I can confidently say that my Bluetooth service is being run. So how do I see what Bluetooth interfaces are available on my computer? Let's go ahead and use the HCI config tool to do that, right? So I'm going to go ahead and type in HCI config, and what do we see here? So I have one interface at the moment. It's called HCI 0, right? We have some information on what kind of bus it's connected through, what our Bluetooth address is, right? So on and so forth. We have this information that it's up and that it's running. It's not running any scans, but it's just kind of chilling there. And a good amount of preliminary information, but we can actually expand this a bit if we say all, and if we add the super user prefix, right? So now we have a little bit more information, right? So we see, once again, the Bluetooth address as running. We can see what the name of our Bluetooth device is. We can see what class our Bluetooth device is. This is an important piece of information that I'll be expanding on in a little bit. And we can see what service, right? These are all things that are related to that class ID. And we can see what the manufacturer of this Bluetooth chip is, right? My manufacturer is listed as an Intel Corp Bluetooth chip. So this is different from the OUI. The OUI is a organizationally unique identifier, That's related to the company that built the device that is hosting that Bluetooth chip. Right? We'll be looking at that again in a second when I start scanning the head unit I have next to me. But I want to talk a little bit about the class ID for a second now. So this 0x1C010C identifies my Bluetooth device as a computer, as a laptop, right? This can be changed on some Bluetooth chips. It's possible that you can change the class of the Bluetooth chip inside your computer. I'll be showing you how to do that in just a second. It's pretty simple. But it's also possible that you can't, right? Some laptops come with Bluetooth chips that don't allow you to change that class ID. And why would you want to change your class ID? Your car is likely not expecting you to connect to it with a laptop. But if you can trick the car into thinking your laptop is a cell phone, it might be a little bit more willing to play along, if you catch my drift. So if you have a USB Bluetooth adapter, which I happen to be holding in my hand, you can't see it, but you'll have to believe me that it's there, you can actually change the class on that device. So I'm going to insert it into my computer now, and we're going to run HCI config once again and see how things have changed, right? So pressing up, run the same exact command, and now we see I have HCI 0 as before, nothing has changed, but we now have HCI 1 as well. And HCI 1 has been given the name Azoth 2. Azoth is the name of my computer, my laptop. It's a really lame name, but this is the Bluetooth address that I have associated with it. And we can see that it's up and it's running. It's actually running a scan right now, even though no one asked it to, but it's just doing what it wants. And we can see that for this little USB Bluetooth dongle, its manufacturer is Cambridge Silicon, right? So if I wanted to masquerade as a cell phone and connect to a automotive infotainment system or anything else for that matter, how would I do that? Well, if we come here and type in another feature that the HCI config tool suite has, HCI config class HCI, or wait, HCI config HCI1 class, right? It'll just show me the class information of this HCI1 controller. If I wanted to change that to, say, 0x5A020C, I didn't pick this at random, by the way. This is, I happen to know what this class belongs to. Operation not permitted. Yes, I need to be sudo to do this class change. So sorry. If we check again what the class for HCI1, now it's, let's see, hold on a second. I am getting ahead of myself and running the wrong commands. Okay, so now you can see the class has changed and my device class is now listed as smartphone. What a difference. I've somehow managed to trick my computer or any other surrounding device into thinking that this Bluetooth interface is coming from a smartphone. You can imagine it doesn't have to be a phone. I could pretend that I'm a pair of headphones and that I don't have any inputs, which means you need to accept my pairing requests unconditionally, which is a little bit weird, but it happens, right? So the idea is you have access to this whole dictionary of class IDs, and you can try and masquerade your device however you please. So now I'm actually going to get to the part where we start to interact with the head unit. So you can't see it, but I am going to start the process of connecting to the head unit. So off screen, I started clicking the buttons that allow me to pair a phone, and we're going to try and look for it from our computer. So if I come and I say HCI tool scan, what are we going to get? So right now it's scanning for devices that are set to be discoverable, right? Discoverable means the device is actively looking to pair with another device. It's sending out broadcast messages that make it detectable. Most devices by default will not be in discoverable mode, right? Which means you're not supposed to be able to find them. There are ways to find devices that are in discoverable mode, but they require some specialized hardware. Some of you might have heard of a device called an Ubertooth 1, right? There are papers showing how you can use an Ubertooth 1 to actually find devices that are not in discoverable mode, assuming that they're connected to any other device in the vicinity. Because when they're connected to other devices, they're not sending out these broadcast, hey, I'm here messages, but they are sending data from themselves to the other device. That data is, of course, identifiable, and with a special hardware and a special program, you can find it. That's out of the scope of today's lesson, but it's good to know that it does exist. Just because your phone isn't in discoverable mode, that kind of security by obscurity isn't really very valid. But For the time being, back to our present day, we have now this Bluetooth address. I'm going to copy it, and we're going to use it in a couple of enumeration techniques. So now that we have the Bluetooth address, we're going to try and get some information from it. Let's start by doing sudo hci tool info, and then paste that address. Requesting information. And oh, what do we have here? Quite a bit. So we can see that the Bluetooth address is, as we saw it before, the OUI company, right? The organizationally unique identifier. This is the company that made the device we're talking to, is Alps Electronic, has Denso printed on top. So I'm not sure how that works out, but this is the company, essentially the manufacturer of the device that we are talking to. And the device name, the Bluetooth chip, I renamed it to Hello White Motion, just because it's our thing. And we can see some other important information here, right? So the LMP version, this is the Link Manager Protocol version being run by this Bluetooth chip, is 4.1. And there is a table available on the Bluetooth Special Interest Group's website where you can actually map this Bluetooth version, this LMP version, to different versions of Bluetooth. And that could give you an idea of how old the device you're talking to is. And, you know, that's a good way to kickstart research on different vulnerabilities that might affect this device. In addition to that, we see that this is a device, this Bluetooth chip is manufactured by Qualcomm, right? Different from this OUI company here, the manufacturer ID here is just showing us who made the chip itself that we're communicating with through Bluetooth. This is also an important piece of information for when you want to look for any kind of, you know, published vulnerabilities regarding chips by this manufacturer, so on and so forth. So we can see that it's quite easy to get a lot of information, right? This features page is kind of giving information on what kinds of Bluetooth communications are supported, right? So it's advertising 3-slot packets, 5-slot packets, encryption, slot offset, so on and so forth. There's a whole lot of stuff here. It's all quite thick, and I'm afraid I'm not really going to be able to talk about everything that's being mentioned in this features page, because there is quite a bit of information here, but it's good to know that it's there, and when it's relevant, it's good to know how to find it. So what other tools are at our disposal to probe this device for information? So if you remember from my slides, there was a protocol on the host side called the SDP. SDP stands for Service Discovery Protocol. It's how Bluetooth devices advertise to other devices around them what services they support. So we're going to actually browse what services this device supports, right? So SDP tool browse is a tool included in, it will probably be included by default if you're using BlueZ in your Linux stack, to actually ask the device what kind of services it supports. This is supposed to work without connecting to the device, because you need to know what it does before, oh, I'm getting a pairing request. I'm going to confirm that. And here we see we have a ton of information just spat back at us. And not all of this is going to be useful in the immediate sense that we can exploit it, but it gives us a better idea of what it is we're talking to. So if we see here service name A2DP SNK, I can tell you right now that this is advanced audio. I don't remember what the DP stands for, but this is a sync. Essentially, this means you can connect a device to this to play audio through it, right? AV remote, audio, video remote. And I'm not going to go into too much detail on what all these individual little data markers here means, but some of the important things that you can look at are actually the services themselves, right? So phonebook access, right? This is the profile that's used by the device to import the contacts from your phone. And then when you make a call from your phone or when you receive a call from outside, it knows how to identify who's calling you, right? We have object push, the ability to push files to this device. Interesting, right? Maybe you could try pushing a picture to it. Who knows? I don't know what would happen if we did that. And I'm not going to be exploring that today because that's out of the scope of this talk. But you can see some important information when it comes to protocols like this, right? This is the RF COM, right? The radio frequency communication channel used by this service. So if you wanted to send a file through Object Exchange, right, that's what OBEX stands for. Sorry if I didn't clarify that before. You would have to specify which channel you were sending it on, and this lets you know what channel you have to send it on for it to reach this device, right? Now, there are different types of communication channels. There's L2CAP and RFCOM, and I think most of the ones in here will have RFCOM channels, but not L2CAP channels. Yeah. But the point stands, right? This is a very easy to use tool. It lets you gather a lot of information from the device you're testing. Sometimes they'll have customer or manufacturer specific services being run on this device. For example, the Alps HFM, I couldn't tell you what HFM means, but this seems like it's a manufacturer specific service, and they're running it on RFCOM channel 2. What that actually is, I don't really know. But this is obviously, if you thought this was interesting and you were doing this kind of evaluation of this device, you could of course dig deeper and probe into that channel and try and gain some more, a better understanding of what this device is doing. So we've covered SDP protocol, the SDP browse feature. What else do I have up my sleeve that might be of interest? So Bluetooth CTL, Bluetooth control. This is how BlueZ actually does its. You can do manual pairing and connection and managing of your Bluetooth devices all through this interface, right? So if I go ahead and click this, you see it says agent registered, and now we're not in our standard terminal shell anymore. We're now in the Bluetooth control thing. So if I hit help, it'll show us some of the different services or commands available in this Bluetooth control functionality suite, right? We have advertise, scan, GATT. GATT is related to Bluetooth Low Energy and is unfortunately out of the scope of my expertise, so we're not going to talk about that. But I'm going to talk about just some of the more commonly used aspects of Bluetooth CTL. So one of the first things you want to be able to do is list your Bluetooth interfaces. So these are the two interfaces that I have on my computer, right? You remember we added the USB dongle Bluetooth device. That's this one over here. And I have it set it to my default. I'll show you how to change that in a second. And this is the native one to my laptop. This is the embedded Bluetooth chip inside my laptop. If I wanted to choose one or the other, I would say select 6.8, tab completion. And if we run list again, we'll actually see that we've switched for this one to be the default, right? Simple as that. The documentation around Bluetooth CTL is a little bit non-existent. It's very hard to find a good guide on how to use this to its full potential. If someone has one that I haven't seen before, by all means, please share it. I'd happily read up on it. But anyway, going forward, what else would we want to do with our Bluetooth device, right? We could turn on the scan and see what devices are in our area, right? So we're discovering, and you can see a couple of things showing up, right? There's some information on some surrounding devices. I don't know who these belong to. I don't really know what they're for, but we know that they're there. I don't want to leave that on for too long. I don't want to expose anyone in my apartment complex for using a Huawei device or whatever. But what we can do with this is after we've scanned the device, we've added it to our list of known devices, you can kind of look at it in the devices section. So now we can see all the devices that we've scanned are present here. And you can copy a Bluetooth address and use it to ask for more info. So now if I check paired devices, this will show any devices that I have a paired connection with. Currently there are none. And let's see, do I still have... Yes, I still have that Bluetooth address copied. Let's say we use the Bluetooth CTL information command. Oh, it says it's not available. So this happened because when I started Bluetooth CTL, my device here had already stopped being available. So let's actually try and connect again. So let's remove this device. And let's add another device. Okay. One second. All the instructions on this thing are in Japanese. So Please forgive me if it takes me a second. Okay, so now if we go scan on again, then we found our device. We're going to go here and copy this address once more. And we're going to go ahead and hit in info there. Oh, what's up, John? You something to say? Oh, okay, cool. All right, so when we use the info command through Bluetoothctl, we can see a little bit more information about this device. So previously, we weren't actually able to see what the class of device it was, but now we can see it through this interface, right? It shows us the same things as before, the name and the alias, but now we know the class of the device and its icon, right? It's an audio card. It's essentially just the part of this head unit that the Bluetooth is using is classified as an audio card. We're not paired, we're not trusted, we're not connected. It doesn't support legacy pairing, sometimes an important piece of information to know. And then these are some of the different services along with their UUIDs. A UUID is a universally unique identifier for a service that can be used through Bluetooth. And as you can see, it's quite long. And you can actually Google these and find out in more detail what they do. Some of these are vendor specific, so how much success you'll have researching them is really up to that availability of information, but it's there, right? So that about wraps up the majority of the functionality I want to go over with Bluetooth control. But before I switch over and we start thinking about taking some questions, I'd like to actually show you how to log some Bluetooth data. And now I'd like to make it clear that when I say logging Bluetooth data, I'm talking about logging the HCI layer. If you remember from the diagram I had showing the makeup of the Bluetooth stack, we only have access to a very limited number of those protocols, and we can actually record some data from, excuse me, from the host controller interface protocol, right? So I've got another terminal here. I'm going to show you the command to do that. Sudo bt, wait, no, what was it again? Let's just, okay, bt, there we go. Okay, sudo btmon -w. This will allow you to actually save to a file, and then you can name your file whatever you like. And if you make it a .log file, you can actually open it up later in Wireshark. So if we say ASRG demo.log and I hit enter, put in my password for super user, now you can actually see what the interfaces they're logging are. So they're showing the logging HCI1 and HCI0. Nothing is coming out here right now because there's still no Bluetooth traffic. But if I come back here and I exit Bluetooth control and I say HCI tool scan again, right? We started scanning. You can actually now see that it'll be reporting the different results that we get from our scan in this Bluetooth monitor program, right? And this is all being saved to that log file that can then be opened later in Wireshark if you want to have a slightly more advanced log analysis or analysis tool. Yeah, so you can kind of see it in real time as well. It's one of the nice things about running it this way is you can see in real time what that log data looks like, and then it'll of course be saved as well. And yeah, it gives a lot of the same information that we found through the other tools. Maybe it's just easier to do it like this, depending on what exactly it is you're looking for, right? So we can see the class ID through this. So all of this will be available in the log, right? This is that device that we found. We're passing that information from the host to the controller, and that's where we're recording it from, right? So, excuse me, my throat was a little bit dry, but this is how you would record that kind of HCI traffic on your device. And then, of course, when you're done, you just hit Control C, and if we hit clear in ls, you can now see that we have that log file saved, and it's there for later review if you have any logs you want to include in a research profile or anything of that sort. That is about it. So that is the extent of the tools I wanted to show in this live demonstration. John, if you wanted to start taking questions from the audience, maybe if someone wanted me to expand on anything. I hope I wasn't too fast. See, it's about 6:40 right now.
No, actually, Kamel, it's really really cool information. Um, I'm sure everybody's going to kind of replay and go through the steps a little bit after the live stream is done. But so if you guys do have questions while you're listening, I have a few questions myself. But go ahead, type them in the chat window, and I'll speak them over to Camila. But Camila, this is great, cool information, right? So you get this log file, and then what could be the next steps here? So how do we, once you have this log file, what are you going to start doing then?
So as I mentioned before, unfortunately, the data contained in this log file is only HCI data. It's only data from that one level, which is where the host, your machine, talks with the controller, the Bluetooth chip.
Mhm.
Everything beyond that is unfortunately lost to us. There are tricks you can use. There's some specialized hardware you can use to examine, for example, the link management protocol. There's a lab somewhere out in Europe. I believe they're called the CMO lab. They developed a framework called Eternal Blue, right? It's not the internal blue. Those are the ones for the, wait, no, I have it the other way around. They developed a suite of tools called Internal Blue for Bluetooth analysis that lets you use a cell phone with modified firmware as your Bluetooth chip. And you use that to essentially read the link management protocol packets during a communication with some other devices, right?
Mm.
They exist, they're very complicated, and I didn't feel like this was an appropriate venue to try and run that kind of demo just because of how hard it is to set up, and there's a lot of a mess to that. But with the HCI logs, quite frankly, the most you can do is use them just to keep track of any devices you found. So if you wanted to set up like a device that was scanning for discoverable and non-discoverable devices and then have it log all that information, you can use it as a kind of an access control measure, right? Anyone who passed through, if they had a cell phone with Bluetooth on, you might pick them up and you'd be able to say, hey, well, this person passed through at this time and we were able to pick him up on Bluetooth. You know, if during a security evaluation, sometimes the customer just wants to have logs of everything, and in most cases this is the most you can provide them, right? But it's so from a practical perspective, I can't say I've found much many like gems or like haha moments from the HCI logs, just because the other protocols are where all the really important stuff happens. But it's good to know that they exist. I could be wrong. I could be speaking in ignorance here. There's likely to be one or two people far smarter than me when it comes to Bluetooth in the chat right now, and they might just hit me up later saying everything you've said is entirely inaccurate and you should feel ashamed of yourself for speaking in front of these people. But I'm always ready to be proven wrong, right? Like I can only share my own opinion.
It's
But
part
as
of,
far as next steps regarding the rest of the tools and not specifically the logs, yeah, it's part of being a security researcher is that someone will always be there to tell you there's a better way. Um, once you've gathered all this information, you really want to start trying to dive into how you can interact with those different services, because sometimes on a Bluetooth device you'll actually have like serial connections over Bluetooth. That's a thing, right? It's not impossible to think that you could get a shell on a device through a Bluetooth connection, right? You do tests. You see, okay, can I connect to this without pairing to the device? Can I connect to this without authenticating? Can I spoof another device that's already paired, right? Copy its class, copy its Bluetooth address. And if I try and connect again, what'll happen? Right? You have a lot of different avenues you can kind of go down once you've gotten all of this information. And it helps to know that it exists. But after that it's up to your imagination really how much you can make use of it.
okay, great. Um, so, Bluetooth is a standard, it's a norm. Where can we find the information regarding norm? Is this from the Bluetooth interest group directly?
Yeah, the Bluetooth Special Interest Group publishes the actual specification itself. I don't know if they have on their website every version of the spec listed. um Let me check. They have the core specifications available on their website. I'm actually going to go check it out myself right now on my other screen. And at the moment, and they are free for download, right? So if you go to the
Great.
specifications tab on their website, you can see their working groups, core specifications. If you click on the core specifications tab, you can see they have version, this is CS underscore 5.2 and CS9, right? I think some of these are, I'm not, I'm not going to make a statement in ignorance on what the difference between these is because I don't know how they're organizing their file sharing here, but they're sharing all of the core specifications for free. Anyone can read them. And the thing is, I said a lot of the protocol-based problems with Bluetooth were patched out with the 2.1 um, update back in 2007. I want to say. Forgive me if my history is off, but it's not true that there aren't any more protocol based um, vulnerabilities. And what I mean by a protocol based vulnerability is that there isn't some kind of glitch or some kind of buffer overflow that causes this to be exploitable. There are parts of the specification that allow itself to be exploited according to the way the specification is written. For example, last year there was a vulnerability disclosed called the knob vulnerability, right? KNOB, key negotiation of Bluetooth. Essentially, until very recently, the Bluetooth specification, it allowed for the entropy of the key used for the encrypted communications. I'm using a lot of big words, right? But the entropy of the key for the encrypted communications could be negotiated, right? Based on the capabilities of the different devices. And this negotiation range was at maximum 16 bytes of encryption of entropy, 16 bytes of entropy versus just one. So you could actually program a device that would say, I'm only able to communicate with 1 byte of entropy on our encryption. Please take pity on me. And all the other devices would, because it's according, that's within spec, that's within specification, they would say, okay, sure, yeah, we can do that. We'll talk with encryption with only 1 byte of entropy. And at that point, with only 1 byte of entropy, if you had that kind of specialized hardware like the Ubertooth One, and you were able to find that communication as it was happening, you could in real time reverse engineer it, right? You could in real time break that encryption and view all the traffic being communicated between those two things, right? Not to mention, not to mention, there were this was okay. So the way the researchers implemented it was they took a phone, modified its own firmware to only speak at 1 byte of entropy encryption. But they theorized that it's possible that you can induce this single byte of entropy encryption through reactive jamming, right? Reactive jamming is like the black hole of cybersecurity, right? It's I'm going to use my radar to change the data that your wireless device gets by blasting it with electricity, right? I'm going to send the right amount of electricity in the right pattern so that when your computer or your device gets these Bluetooth packets, they've changed based on what I say, right? And then it was theoretical. No one's implemented that before. I'd be very shocked to see if I'd be how would I say, like, I'd look on in like horrified amusement if somebody actually did manage to get that going.
At least
Theoretically, and there are
no one's
papers
been
showing the
caught yet.
feasibility. Yes, you're correct. But there are papers that have argued the feasibility of reactive jamming as an attacking technique. And so if we go by transitive property, okay, if they say reactive jamming is viable, right, and they've done a couple studies more or less proving that it's viable, and these studies are quite old. With more advanced technology, it's even easier to do, right? If you go with the idea that reactive jamming is possible and this vulnerability exists where you can negotiate the key size down, then you have what is a big deal, right? I don't know the technical term for a big deal, but it's a big deal, right?
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Camila. Really so cool information here. And the standards are available. All the norms are public, so we can take a look and do research ourselves to understand how this thing should be or is working. Um, I want to quickly, we have two questions from the audience. Basically, are there any specs or standards or best practices for updating Bluetooth firmware in autos? Like you at the beginning, you were talking a little bit about that other chips are taking that function of updating the Bluetooth firmware. Are there any best practices or standards that we can help mitigate this problem?
That's a great question. So, when I was talking before about managing updates through Bluetooth, I don't want to make it sound like the Bluetooth chip was actually doing the updates. The Bluetooth chip was installed on a greater board, right? This is probably with regards to the Tencent Lexus research that I talked about earlier. The
Hmm.
Bluetooth chip is running processes on that board, and that board has the administrative privilege to push updates to the other boards connected to it by I2C or something, right? That's what I meant. So once you had, the code execution through that Bluetooth process, that's when you're able to, through that board's capabilities, push updates to the other boards. But with regards to updating Bluetooth chips, right, that's actually a big problem because it's all managed by the Bluetooth chip manufacturer. And so the manufacturers themselves have to make these updates, right? The end user doesn't really have the option to make security updates themselves. So if they're using like older Bluetooth chips or older, cheaper Bluetooth chips, they might not have those firmware updates because maybe they left the factory too early, right? How are you going to update that? A lot of these are like proprietary update mechanisms to rewrite the firmware on these chips. I know that Broadcom chips, the way their patches work is they don't actually change the read-only memory of the chip. They have their own kind of uh, like patching language that they do to run patches in runtime, right? So they will send a file to your file system, right? And when your device boots up, it reads that file and it applies all those patches in runtime to the Bluetooth chip's operation. Right? That's how Broadcom does it. It's going to be different for every vendor, and I mentioned that Bluetooth is incredibly complicated and makes it a real pain to study. This is one of those reasons, right? The vendors like to pretend there are no problems. They don't really want to admit that they have this huge issue. Some remote code execution issues on Bluetooth devices on different chips, right? You can report them to the manufacturer. They'll say we already updated that. That doesn't exist anymore. It's like, well, you say that, but there's tens of millions of devices out here that still have this problem. Like, what am I supposed to do, right?
Hmm.
It's uh, it's a weird balance, and there's yeah,
But
it's
we have, in the automotive industry, we at least, I'm sure in other industries as well, we're signing code or patches so that we know that the patches are coming from, a reliable source, and that we can check this signature before we start to update the firmware or whatever. This is the type of mechanism I was thinking might be helpful here in this situation if we did really check the authenticity of patches.
so you're saying I'm assuming with respect to the Tencent security disclosures,
Hmm.
how they were able to rewrite the firmware on the UCOM chip.
Hmm.
I would agree if you had a mechanism in place where you had to have digitally signed software patches that might have mitigated the problem. But
Yep.
I'm going to assume in this case that such countermeasures didn't exist. I
I
can't
think,
say that full technical breakup hasn't been released, but
yeah. Well, okay, that's great, Camille. Thank you for answering that question. One more question for you, or maybe two. Um, can you really force Bluetooth devices to pair to yours? So, like, can you make someone forcibly pair to you?
uh, it um, so There are different ways to pair devices, right? And these are based on the capabilities of the device in question. There is a form of pairing that is, and this is the technical, this is the literal term within the Bluetooth specification. It's called just works pairing, which means
Hmm.
there's no user input, there's no checking a pin number, there's nothing. It just happens because that device is like a pair of headphones. It doesn't have a keyboard, doesn't have a monitor. You can't do anything with it. You just have to accept everything, right? That's how it works. That exists. That is a thing, right? There are things like default Bluetooth pairing keys that are hard coded to the device and can't be changed, which is, well, that's one way to add some security to those headphones that don't have a monitor or a keyboard. But not if you make the default pin 0000, right? Like forcing a device to pair with you is, it's at once, depending on what version of Bluetooth and what device it is in question, it's, I want to say it's probably possible, but I don't want to speak in ignorance, and so I'm going to say that most automobiles, they actually will have that kind of basic pin code or passkey matching check, and that means that you need to confirm on your device that yes, I see the same number, or you have to enter the pin code. And so it's probably possible, but it's not something that I would say is a huge security issue. One of the big problems is that a lot of the security vulnerabilities that are the really big ones don't actually require you to be paired to begin with, right?
Hmm.
Like when it comes to detecting devices that aren't in, discovery mode, you can still do that with the right hardware. And then a lot of devices are programmed, like when I mentioned with the service discovery protocol, you don't need to be paired to the device to get that information. You just have to ask for it because, and it's programmed to respond. All SDP traffic is unencrypted, and that's because it's just I need to let you know what I do before we connect, and
Hmm.
that's a necessity of the nature of that kind of communication, right? So you don't need to be paired to get that information, right?
Okay.
And there are different services. I could push you towards a couple of amazing talks on Bluetooth that go far more in depth by that CMO lab. They've presented at CCC, Chaos Computer Conference, I want to say,
Hmm.
is what the expansion of that acronym. But they've done some amazing work, and that's honestly where I learned most of what I know about the actual inner workings of Bluetooth. It's because they've taken the time to go and reverse engineer some chips and actually find out how this stuff works. By God, I don't know how to do that. Like that's
Great. No,
like
but
magic to me. Right? But
actually, that's my last and next question is, okay, for people that would love to learn something new about Bluetooth, where or what would be the best resource that you would recommend for people to learn?
okay, I'm going to stop presenting my terminal for a second and switch back to my PowerPoint so that I can type out a couple of links that I think would really get the picture across to anyone um, in the audience. Right.
Great.
So let me just pick the right screen again. Here we go. Okay. So this is that I have used. This is the one I was mentioning, the CMO lab, right? This is a link to um, their GitHub, and on their GitHub they have linked all of their talks, all of their presentations given at different conferences are all linked on their GitHub. They talk about their internal Blue platform. It is a platform to allow you to change the firmware of a Broadcom chip and then use it for things like the knob attack or other customized attacks or snooping link management protocol traffic. All of it is done by these folks. They honestly are some brilliant people. They're far smarter than me. And they have a lot of great talks available on the internet for free that you can watch and learn a lot about. I believe that at a couple of European conferences very recently, they've given some more talks, So I have some reading and some listening I have to do too. So I can't stress enough how great of a resource this is. To be fair, a lot of what they're talking about might be a little bit um, heavy for someone who doesn't know anything about Bluetooth. And for someone who wants to really get started, oddly enough, I gave a presentation at GrimCon back in April where I talked about, I had a bunch of resources listed there, but I can't remember any of them for the life of me. There are guides on how to use the Bluesy programming in Python and C++. I can recommend. If yeah, I have I have another set of slides that might better help with that question. But anyone that wants those, I'm happy to share them. If you just send me an email or tweet at me, I'll share them with you. They're free for anyone. Very happy
Great.
to do so.
Thanks,
But
Camille.
yeah, the Bluetooth specification, CMO Labs. Yeah, just doing what I can.
Okay, great. I think that's all the time that we have for today. Camila, I want to thank you very much. I mean, this is such a nice demonstration to see, how some of the tools work, to see, to think about either from the testing perspective or even from the development perspective, how Bluetooth is working and how we in the automotive industry should go about ensuring that we implement secure Bluetooth solutions. So, Camille, before we close, would you like to say anything?
Um, all I would say is, I guess, keep your phones not in discoverable mode. Drink a lot of water, stay safe, stay inside, stay healthy, so that when we do start having in-person meetings again, we can all enjoy the company of one another. And I don't know if I should plug my employer or not, but look up white. No, actually, don't go to our website. I still need to fix it. It's too much wrong with that website. It's too out of date. But thank you so much for having me. And hopefully, actually, there is one thing for those of you that are in the know. GrimCon 2.0. Grim is a company that does a lot of security research. They're having a convention, an online convention later today. It's going to be in the at night for me. It's free to attend. I strongly suggest everyone go. I gave a Bluetooth presentation at the first one back in April, and tonight I'm actually only going as a volunteer. I'm helping out in the green room. But anyone that's interested in some high quality security content, by all means, make your way over to GrimCon, and yeah, that's really it. I'm out of clever things to say now.
Great, Camille. Thank you so much for being here today. For everybody else, thank you for joining today, ASRG World. We have new webinars every week, and we also have another one tomorrow, so check it out. As Camille said, check out GrimCon. I forgot about GrimCon or Grim, the security conference, which is going on later today as well. So um, get involved. Contact us at ASRG. The email is info@asrg.com, and looking forward to hearing from you guys. All right, so without further ado, thank you, Camille, and we'll talk soon.